The following excerpt with Congressman Harris is from the July 23, 2021 episode of The Catholic Current. The full episode, including Father's Let's Talk About This and his weekend readiness segments, can be found on your favorite podcasting platform. Just search for The Catholic Current. I'm going to continue the conversation now regarding pushing back in legislation regarding regulations limitation on the abortion franchise. And in the last segment, stay with us for the whole hour. It's you and me with Weekend Readiness. My guest is Representative from Maryland's 1st Congressional District since 2011. He's a medical officer in the Naval Reserve and was a state senator before coming to Congress. Congressman Andy Harris, welcome to the Catholic Current.
Oh, it's good to be with you, Father.
Congressman, you have some alarming information for us about two bulwarks that limited the abortion franchise. One was the Hyde Amendment, and the other was the Weldon Amendment. They're under attack right now. Tell us about that, please.
Yes, so the Hyde Amendment, which has prevented public funding using taxpayer funds to pay for abortion under the Medicaid program, has been around for over 40 years, over 4 decades, through Republican and Democrat administrations. Broadly accepted on a bipartisan basis, but this year, for the first time, the Democrats who control the House Appropriations Committee have decided to take that amendment out of our appropriations bills, which would allow, in fact, taxpayer funding for abortions in the Medicaid program. So, a definite change from what's been going on for decades, and next week, the final votes on the bills will probably be taken on the House floor, and then it'll go over to the Senate, where hopefully the senators can insert that provision back in, and again protect taxpayers from having their money pay for abortions. The second amendment that was removed from those bills was called the Weldon Amendment, which was named after a physician from Florida who put it into the legislation. And that amendment would require that if you receive federal funds, any healthcare entity, you can't allow or have someone working for that entity be forced to participate in abortion. So again, it applies to any part of the healthcare spectrum. So whether it's you can't force an insurance company to cover it, you can't afford a hospital to perform the abortions, you can't force a practitioner like a physician to participate in it. That was a very important conscience protection, and again, which unbelievably was removed by the majority in the House. And again, hopefully, when that gets over to the Senate adds that protection back in. A very, very important protection for practitioners and entities that believe that abortion is wrong.
Congressman, have the sponsors of these changes to these two important amendments, have they given a rationale for why now these amendments have to go?
Well, the claim on the Hyde Amendment is that somehow it is prejudicial against poorer women because it does disallow funding under the Medicaid program, but of course, poor, and I should say minority women as well. But as we know from statistics, minorities are actually way overrepresented in terms of the number of abortions done in the United States. So there's really no practical evidence that it is, in fact, on its face discriminatory. With regards to the Weldon Amendment, the argument they make is that this is another way that entities can force their will upon women who make their choice over what to do with, quote, their own bodies. So again, they make arguments, but I think both arguments fall flat on their face.
Well, as someone who's worked in medical ethics and is also a Catholic priest, I'm very much concerned about violation of conscience. And I'm aware of the fact that a number of your Democratic colleagues in the House who identify as Catholic put out a letter to the Catholic bishops recently saying, hey, we can be very strong abortion advocates contrary to church teaching and still line up freely to receive Holy Communion without causing harm, foul, or scandal. And their primary argument is shut up because conscience, but apparently because conscience doesn't seem to hold sway when it stands in the way of what they want. So I find that to be a head-scratcher. Where do you think this is likely to go? When is the vote coming up in the House, and what do you think the outcome will be?
Well, we are going to. There will be an attempt next week to try to insert the amendments on the floor of the House. Again, we actually had one Democrat in committee vote to restore the Hyde and the Weldon amendments. If we have 4 or 5 Democrats on the floor of the House, we could actually restore those amendments on the House floor next week if leadership allows those votes to be taken. They may, in fact, not even allow those votes to be taken on the floor of the House. So I'm going to assume they're not going to be added back in the House. These bills will go over to the Senate. where the Senate Minority Leader, Mr. McConnell from Kentucky, has already said that these are non-starters, that without Hyde and Weldon protections, that these appropriations bills won't go any further in the Senate.
Do you have confidence in that judgment?
I do. I think that we do have the votes to reinsert those in the Senate, or I should put it the other way, to stop appropriations bills if those amendments, those protections, because they really are very important protections if they're not put into the appropriations bills as they move through the Senate. So I think that I'm pretty confident because if all of that fails, then what we end up doing is we just revert to what the law is this year for next year. So it's called a continuing resolution. We merely continue the budget as it was for this year, and this year's budget has those protections. So if we went to that, those protections would be in place. So I am pretty confident that at the end of this struggle, we will, in fact, protect conscience rights of healthcare entities and providers and prevent federal taxpayer dollars from paying for abortions.
Friends, I'm speaking with Congressman Andy Harris. He's representative for Maryland's 1st Congressional District since 2011. We're talking about some proposed amendments to federal regulations and law that would require taxpayers to fund abortions and also to limit the rights of religious conscientious objections to participating in abortions. Should the worst case scenario prevail and these amendments are removed, what's the likely consequence? What happens next in terms of the Hyde Amendment protections being removed? How much federal dollars are we talking about going to pay for abortions?
Well, it could be millions of federal dollars, tens of millions of federal dollars that could pay for Medicaid abortions in the Medicaid program, and again, we'd have to see if things change after the 2022 election. They might change. We might have a different Congress. We might have the pro-life majority may come back in the House of Representatives. And we could change it at that time. But I'm praying and hoping that we don't get to that over in the Senate they restore those protections, or we just default to continuing the policy as it is this year, which includes both the Hyde and Weldon protections.
Congressman, as I've said on the air very often, I'm a dark, brooding, melancholic Irishman with an apocalyptic imagination, and I hope for the best and I prepare for the worst. If the Weldon Amendment fails, would it be unreasonable to expect that there would be a lot of test cases that certain doctors and nurses or institutions would be made public examples of? Is that a concern of yours? Is that likely to happen if the Weldon Amendment goes away?
Oh, I think so. I think that there will be institutions where, for instance, they will insist that all their personnel participate in abortions, and if someone refuses to, that disciplinary action will be taken against them. This was actually one of the index cases was a nurse in New York years ago who was forced to at Mount Sinai Hospital, who was forced to participate, and again, it took several years, even with the Weldon protections in place. It took several years for that to finally be adjudicated. But again, if we don't have the Weldon protections, then I think it will really be up to that hospital, those entities, as to whether or not they, force individuals to participate against their conscience.
What can ordinary citizens do? Vote intelligently in the next election, of course. That's been the usual response, although election integrity is kind of an open question these days, I've heard from many sources. Do people call? Do they write? Do they start petitions? What can people who are concerned citizens say? That, hey, I don't want my doctor's conscience violated, and I don't want my hard-earned money going to the murder of children in the womb. Are American citizens helpless in the face of the inevitable? What can we do?
No, I think fortunately, I think on both of these issues, the majority of Americans, a clear majority of Americans, favor both of these policies, favor conscience protection and favor taxpayer dollars not being used for abortion. So I think that at this point, because time is of the essence, that they should contact their U.S. senators. I think that the restoration of these amendments is going to occur in the Senate, and I think that it shouldn't be a heavy lift for the Senate because, again, a clear majority of Americans favor both of those policies, conscience protection and barring the use of taxpayer dollars to pay for abortions. So I think they're not powerless. They don't have to wait until the 2022 election. They should get on their phones, get on their emails, sit down, handwrite a letter to their U.S. senators insisting that they restore the Hyde and Weldon amendments.
Congress, I'm kind of puzzled, just from a matter of enlightened self-interest, given that the removal of these amendments is so unpopular, why are members of the House pushing so hard for it?
The fact is that there is a very, very vocal pro-abortion minority in the country, and it's true in the House as well. And they are very adamant that this is a very important civil rights, human rights issue, and forget about the human rights of the baby involved. But they are doing it because the simplest way to say is because they can, because they have the votes in the House to do it. They believe they have the votes in the House to do it, regardless of what the majority of Americans believe.
I find that very sad and very disturbing. What's it like fighting this battle uphill continuously? What keeps you going?
Well, again, it's just that I'm firm in my belief that abortion is wrong. That as I mentioned actually in the speaking to the committee during the debate on the Hyde Amendment, that when I was in medical school and training as a physician, I was taught that during pregnancy there are actually two patients involved. There's the mother and the child. That they are separate patients with separate considerations. And again, that belief in that sanctity of life of that baby is what drives me. I am convinced that is right. That is what truth is. And we can't hide from it. We have to try to again convince as many people as possible, make them see the light of that truth.
Congressman, we've got about a minute left. Is there any hope for the Born Alive Protection Act seeing the light of day anytime soon?
No, not in the House, because the House majority controls what comes to the floor. But again, if a pro-life majority takes control of the House after the 2022 elections, I'm convinced that we will pass the bill out of the House, pass it over to the Senate.
Well, we'll pray for that very joyful outcome. Congressman Andy Harris, representative from Maryland's 1st Congressional District, thank you for being a very informative guest. God bless your good work. I hope we can have you on the program again.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.